This is a very blatant symbolism about how her deep-throating COVID-19 is actually a reflection of how we are deep-throating COVID-19. Today I have my smart glasses on because I will be discussing the literary merits of Kissing the Coronavirus. This is an erotica novella that was highly requested by several people who wanted me to do a video about it, and I would guess that people probably wanted me to do a rant review where I would trash the book and make fun of all the sex scenes and the writing style. But in actuality, when I read this book, I don't know. I think the Rona got me thinking. When I read the book, I found there to be a lot of subtext and a lot of meaning behind the concepts and the writing decisions that the author has made. In my opinion, Kissing the Coronavirus is a very timely literary novel that quintessentially captures the economic and sociological struggles that we are facing in the unprecedented pandemic today. The book does a great job at juggling very complex subjects and critiques within 45 pages of ass fucking. So in this video essay, I will go ahead and break down all the different concepts that this book explores. First, I will summarize the story to give you a bit of the lay of the land, as she also got laid on the land. The story follows a scientist named Dr. Alexa Ashingtonford, who has been working in a lab for an undefined amount of time. Despite the pandemic causing a devastation across the globe, Alexa feels this strange, unusual feeling of being horny every time she opens the test sample. The opening scene starts with her gripping the test tube and comparing it to an erect penis in the way that it pulsates. She gets so turned on and desperate that she ends up pulling down her pants, pulling down her panties, and she's very close to jamming the test tube up her vajayjay. But unfortunately, her boss interrupts her coochie time when he walks in and asks her about the samples. This is when the book reveals that her boss, Dr. Gertley Chund, or otherwise known as Bob, has assembled a team of scientists together who act as a task force to try to combat the coronavirus and develop a vaccine together. Alexa is determined to get the job done so that she can finally live a normal life where she knows how it feels to grasp a cock once again. So after he leaves, she starts to test with the samples. As she's working, she keeps on having this nagging feeling that the vaccine that they are developing doesn't truly have enough COVID-19 in order for it to work. So she decides, based on her hunch, to go rogue and tamper with the samples. She goes to Dr. Gertley Chun's workstation where she grabs one of the test tubes and decides to drop an extra dose of COVID-19 so that it is just right. She returns everything back and she tells herself that her boss doesn't need to know the changes that she's made because she is completely confident that the medical council will go ahead and approve it. Once Dr. Gertley Chun comes back, he asks about the new samples and she tells him that they are perfect. And he says, well then, we can do it. We can start the trial. And she says, yeah, I'll write the letter to the medical council. And he interrupts and says, no. We're skipping approval from the medical council. And it's at this point where he grabs the vaccine where Alexa had inserted the extra drop of COVID-19 and decides to take it. She keeps on protesting, telling him that maybe it's not a good idea because they don't know if it will actually work, but he insists that this is the right thing to do because he reveals that he actually has COVID-19. Therefore, he is left with no other option. He plunges the syringe into his arm, he injects the vaccine, and then his body's reaction is falling down to the floor, screaming, clutching his chest. The wind starts howling even though they're inside a lab. The lights start flickering on and off. All of a sudden, he passes out. The wind stops. The man stands up and reveals himself to be a completely new hottie. His strong brow, his piercing blue eyes, supple lips, a wide jaw like the trunk of a car, bulky, thick shoulders, a flat stomach, a bulge in his trousers the size of a medium-length python. But obviously, the most prominent feature is that he is completely covered in small green bumps, which sciencey people like Alexa like to call spike proteins. From that observation, she realizes that the creature that she is looking at is no longer her boss, but the coronavirus personified. The coronavirus had ended up consuming him because when he injected the vaccine, he already had so many traces of COVID-19 within his body and within the vaccine that it added together to create more virus than man could handle, and thus became the result of a personified coronavirus / hot piece of ass. She tears up at about the realization that her boss is gone, the coronavirus man wipes away her tears and comforts her. This is a very tender moment that they share together, and it ultimately leads them to making out and fulfilling the sexual tension that was so prominent throughout the story. It is a very graphic scene that I think was the main complaints that a lot of people had. But again, I want to argue that there's a lot of symbolism throughout the story, and especially within the prominent sex scene here. This is a very simple and straightforward narrative, but if you look more critically at the text, you would actually find that there is a lot of symbolism within the pages. If anything, it's actually quite impressive how much symbolism gets packed into such a short story. There's a lot of deeper meanings that the author is trying to evoke through the actions and the character arcs in this erotica. I'm going to break down a few of the themes in this video and how it effectively takes a critical look at the way our humanity has handled the pandemic. So the message is actually quite clear from the moment that you start the book. It's already in the tagline. She was supposed to cure the coronavirus. Instead, she fell in love with it. As we all know, COVID-19 is still an ongoing pandemic. Several countries have been under lockdown. Many places are still under quarantine. It's been almost a year now, and we are still dealing with this pandemic, and there doesn't seem to be an end to it. The tagline is right. We were supposed to cure the coronavirus. We were supposed to social distance. We were supposed to be under quarantine, but we didn't. What this book is trying to convey is why we are not able to contain the pandemic and cure the coronavirus. There are multitudes of reasons why, but a lot of the commentary in the book revolves around how humanity's selfishness and lust for external gratification is the root cause for why COVID-19 is still an ongoing pandemic. This is hinted right from the very first page when we are introduced to Alexa. She stared at the test tube between her fingers, her perfectly pink manicured nails clashing with the pale bubbling liquid inside. Even though Alexa is a scientist who is actively working inside of a lab, her nails are being described here, which means that she is not wearing any gloves, even though that is the standard procedure for scientists and any workers during the pandemic. The fact that this story focuses on her physical appearance and calls out that specific detail about her nails shows how we collectively have prioritized our own vanity over our own safety. It's a subtle hint from the very beginning that shows the ways that we have ignored protocol, prioritize our own appearance, and are rooted within our own conceit. We get a lot of insight into the psyche of our protagonist and how the effects of being under quarantine and the lack of intimacy that comes with it has become a detriment to her feelings of loneliness. Being deprived of those things causes a desire for so many people to break social distancing orders in order to get that external gratification. Some examples of her being affected by quarantine and feeling that loneliness are in various lines where it says it had been so long since Alexa had been with a man. Another line where she's thinking about her boss says, after having been stuck in a lab with him for so long, so deprived of the feeling of a hot man dog inside her lubricated pussy bun, she had even considered asking him if he'd be interested in a quick bit of sex to help her get over her infatuation so she could get on with searching for a cure. There's a lot of inner turmoil that she faces from being alone inside of the lab. The inner turmoil of the protagonist is society's own reflection for how we have been grappling with our own loneliness and our own desires to break social distancing. We then see the effects of that right afterward when it says, Alexa pulled down her lab pants and pulled her panties to the side, her pussy so wet that the lace glided across her skin like a fat man on a water slide. This sentence is particularly symbolic for many reasons. We've already seen this buildup of loneliness and agitation, and now we are seeing the effect that has happened from it with her opening her legs, which similarly is an allegory for how many stores and venues across the world have opened their doors. Despite her being in a professional setting where she should know better, she still opens her vaginal walls and is willing to take on the risk, which is very similar to how our economy and capitalism has forced us to open our own vaginal symbolic doors. This is directly referenced in the simile that the author uses when she compares her pussy so wet that the lace glided across her skin like a man on a water slide. That simile about the man on a water slide is a direct reference to water parks and amusement parks that have notoriously opened up despite the controversy and the risk of opening new cases. Essentially, Alexa's character arc is a reflection of how many people have started off as rule followers, where we started observing observing social distancing, washing her hands, following protocol, to eventually moving into being a risk taker, going to the beach or the bars or the restaurants, going to literal parties, or having a party in your pants. Her panties also get mentioned a lot, specifically her taking them off, even though she shouldn't do that in a lab or any public place, really. This is an allegory to society's attitudes towards another piece of fabric, which are masks. And these have become a polarizing symbol in the year of 2020. Something as simple as a piece of fabric, whether it's panties or a mask, have become a point of contention for many people. There's this expectation to wear a mask, keep yourself covered, don't expose yourself to other people, whether it's from these lips or from your vagina lips. So Alexa taking off her symbolic mask is a sign for when she starts to descend into ignorance. You can tell that she's a very stubborn character who is set in her own ways because it insists throughout the story that she knew there wasn't enough COVID-19. She just knew it. She has a stubborn belief that there actually isn't enough COVID-19, and that's what pushes her to go against regulations and mess with the samples. This is a reference to people who are anti-maskers and are calling COVID-19 a hoax because they don't believe there actually is enough of the disease to worry about. They don't feel threatened by the actual scale of COVID-19. The amount that we actually have in the virus is not enough to worry about in their minds. She has no true basis for this belief, just like how anti-maskers don't have any basis for their own logical fallacies as well. The act of her taking off her panties and going against laboratory rules is a direct reference to how protesters have stormed government buildings and private businesses to deny the face covering requirements for their own political beliefs. It's because of our selfishness and our ignorance that leads us to having COVID-19 spread in such a global scale. We see the consequences of that when Dr. Gertly Chen gets consumed by the coronavirus. He had the virus. There were traces of the virus in the vaccine, vast traces. Adding them together created more virus than a man could handle. I'm the result. So here, the coronavirus man doesn't just represent a sexy, hot love interest with a ripping bod and a hot cock. He is the personification of what happens when our ignorance prevails and we let the virus accumulate. There's a part where the corona man even reveals to Alexa, "You're asymptomatic. You had the virus without even knowing." And she wonders, does that mean Dr. Gertly Chen was infected because of me? Having the protagonist be asymptomatic and be oblivious to the consequences of her actions is very similar to the state of our world today. Humans are generally terrible at assessing risk, but it's even more prominent in the case of the coronavirus. The fact that we've been stuck in her own thought processes and her own desires shows the limited scope that humans have with each other, where we get so used to worrying about our own personal health and about our own issues that we fail to assess the responsibility of the health of others when we are around them. It shows how people are inherently ignorant to the health of others and to their surroundings because they are only focused on whether they themselves are healthy. This ignorance is even further amplified after the corona man shows up and they start to cuddle. She thinks there was something safe about being wrapped in his arms. She should have been scared, but instead she felt safe, the safest she had ever felt. Obviously, as readers, we know that is anything but true, but it's a testament to how deeply entrenched her ignorance is, just like how so many other people truly believe that they are safe in the middle of a pandemic. Her finally giving a blowjob to the corona man like she has always wanted shows the illusion of normalcy that has slowly returned despite the rising rates of COVID-19. Alexa represents so many other people who fool themselves into thinking life is normal and you can be a slutty little slut again, when really the rates of infections are reaching new records and there are tons of new cases surging in every state. Now, what's interesting is that not only does the book critique the general public and our lax attitude towards the virus, but it also gives us a critical look against big pharma companies. You can spot this from the setting where the story is established. The main characters are scientists. The whole story takes place in a lab where they're trying to find a cure for the virus, but it is their lust and their personal priorities that convolute their mission to find the cure. Alexa felt a rush of excitement every time she picked up the corona sample, like a pulsating erect penis, desperate to unleash its devastation on anyone who touched it. So a lot of readers might find it strange that Alexa was so turned on by seeing a simple sample of corona, but I would argue that her her reaction actually makes sense when you consider that this is an allegory for pandemic profiteering. The nature of this virus is already so eccentric that it has created a huge opportunity for people in Alexa's position to profit off of vaccines and expensive therapies. The pulsating penis represents the industry prioritizing profit and capitalism over the needs and the insufficient funds of those who cannot afford proper healthcare. It's a penis that is only erect for the rich and wealthy, but goes limp for those who are unable to afford the price. So when Alexa holds the coronavirus sample, the sample is not just pulsating like a penis, but also pulsating with opportunity for price gouging and industry lobbying. This is even referenced in a global economic scale. Slowly, the virus had spread across the globe. Asia, Europe, some other places, but most importantly and worryingly, America. Now, why does Alexa prioritize America specifically as the most important country to worry about? That's because the United States is the country with the biggest global pharmaceutical markets in the world. The industry is mostly concentrated in the US and regularly profits off of Americans. Asia and Europe are the other two continents where this is most prominent in. But when you look at the history of the industry, so many of these drug makers are reluctant to provide those expensive drugs to poorer nations and third world countries. This is why in that specific excerpt, Alexa prioritizes America and has a very dismissive attitude towards what she calls some other places. Another paragraph that alludes to this says, Alexa tightened her grip on the tube. She imagined it had veins pumping blood to keep it hard for her. She thought about the power. This is, once again, another allegory for price gouging within Big Pharma. Big Pharma companies are the ones who have the power to provide vaccine for corona. When you look at it from that lens, Alexa turning horny from that test sample is not really that surprising because she knows the power that she has in this profiteering opportunity. The United States is already a massive buyer of COVID-19 treatments despite no evidence of it actually working. America, in particular, is in an extraordinary position where we are spending billions of dollars on vaccines that we don't even know will work. So in that case, it makes a lot more sense why Alexa is horny. She literally holds the power in her hands, knowing that the infected and the uninfected alike will pay any price to her to try to fight off the illness through vaccines and a cocktail of expensive treatments. Of course, the greediness isn't just limited to Alexa. We see this in Dr. Gertly Chund as well. When Alexa says that she's going to write a letter to the medical council, he is quick to say, no, we're skipping approval from the medical council, and he goes on and takes the vaccine anyway. The fact that he wasted no time in this is an allegory for where the industry currently stands. We know that this is the ultimate cash cow for big and small pharma companies. So the race to develop treatments and a vaccine will create a historic windfall in the industry, and everyone else will pay the price. Now, what's interesting is that while these scientists and doctors take up a prominent role in the book, there are still anecdotes of other types of workers that are peppered throughout the story, and this references to other types of industries who have been impacted by COVID-19. While we see Big Pharma having the opportunity, we get a glimpse of other industries who are being severely hurt by the ramifications of the coronavirus. Alexa's heart fluttered like it had done the time she had fucked the farmer's cross-eyed son and uncrossed his eyes. So this seems like a very random anecdote, but in actuality, it's a commentary on the disruptive effects of the pandemic on the global agricultural system. Farmers are mentioned here because COVID-19 has exacerbated the challenges that farmers are already facing. Farmers are tasked with planning production at a time where markets like food, commodity, labor, energy are being jolted by all of these shutdowns from both a local, regional, national, and global level. All of these markets are becoming cross-eyed, and the scary thing is we don't know if we can fuck them hard enough to uncross their eyes. There's also a sense of irony that the author uses because while the world is under a shortage of livestock products like meat, Alexa, our protagonist, has had no problem with getting some meat of her own. Another anecdote that gets mentioned says Alexa's heat hammered harder than the time she was hammered by the carpet fitter when he came to fit carpets in her country manor. Again, this is another reference to how tradespeople are dealing with the effects of COVID-19. The virus has had a devastating impact on the plumbing, heating, and house construction supply chain. The economic impact of their supply chain was hammered down just like how Alexa was hammered down by that carpet fitter. Now, for the last portion of this video, I'm going to break down the sex scene that was prominently and graphically written about in this book to show the lack of control that humanity has and how that lack of control results in the coronavirus spreading and escalating quickly. He lowered his neck and chewed away her bra, allowing it to drop to the floor so her breasts were unleashed. They bounced around like water balloons glistening in the summer sun. This is pretty much a direct reference to how COVID-19 took away our summers by literally chewing on our bras and stripping us away of that protective fabric. COVID-19 has simultaneously chewed away our plans. Many people expected the virus to be over by summertime and already made summer plans. That misguided hope is referenced from how her boobies are bouncing like water balloons in the summer sun. The balloon metaphor continues in the next sentences that talks about the corona man's penis. It swelled like a balloon being filled with helium, rising up, standing to command, begging for her to take it in her hands. She grabbed it and began to stroke it up and down. COVID groaned but didn't stop lapping at Alexa's body. His cock rocked up and down with appreciation, the veins bulging out further than she had ever seen. The nature of how the corona man's penis is swelling up to an unprecedented level while she is trying to give it a hand job and rising her wrist action up and down actually represents the rising rates of COVID going up and down. The gesture of Alexa rubbing her hand up and down the penis, even as it's swelling even larger, represents the several lockdowns, reopenings, and lockdowns once again in our own world. It's a tumultuous cycle that keeps on going up and down, but the swelling does not stop. The handjob scene really serves to give us a critical look at the conflicting government messages that we've had and the reopenings of restaurants and bars and venues all around the world that has only exacerbated the wildly divergent individual responses and the reliance on personal responsibility on public health matters. The sex scene starts to escalate quickly, which again is a mirror reflection of how we have let the pandemic escalate quickly. It starts off with her giving him a hand job, but then she transitions to a blowjob. She took him deep into her mouth, her throat stretching as he continued to grow. This is a very blatant symbolism about how her deep-throating COVID-19 is actually a reflection of how we are deep-throating COVID-19. His penis continuing to grow is a metaphor for how new cases are constantly surging open in new states. Alexa's throat stretching represents the capacity of which we are able to handle the big erect penis being shoved down our throats. At some point, we won't be able to handle it. It's just too big and thick. Finally, the sex scene reaches to the climax. As she came, her entire body spasmed and she writhed around like a bumble ball with no off switch. It's not a coincidence that the author mentions there is no off switch. It's a direct reference to how this virus can no longer be contained because we have given up this sense of control. He filled her with love lotion, which oozed out instantly and spread right across the floor. That will, without a doubt, thought Alexa, take a long time to clean up. And this is another self-explanatory sentence that references how we ourselves will have to clean up after our own mess. We as a society have been filled up with COVID-19's love lotion, and it is spreading everywhere and creating a mess. And the only way that it can be cleaned up is through the individual and collective responsibility of both individual people and the government and businesses that are allowing this to happen. The way that the book ends doesn't seem like it's too hopeful that we will actually be able to combat this virus though, because it says, Alexa wanted to spend eternity encased in his warming warmth. The emphasis of eternity implies the sense of permanence that we will be stuck in a state of quarantine. Rather than being appalled by the corona man railing down her pussy, instead, she only feels satisfaction. She was able to fulfill her desire to get railed down, and that to the end of the book has been and will be her only priority. And it hints that as long as we lust for external gratification and prioritize our own individual selfishness, we will spend an eternity with coronavirus. She had listened to her heart and vagina and allowed herself to succumb to COVID's charm. She had ignored what her head had said, the dread, and instead, she had embraced love. Although the main character has a happy ending, literally, this actually isn't quite a happy ending. Instead, it gives the readers a sense of dread because you can see the self-delusion that the character has and how it reflects the self-delusion that many people in the real world have. This paragraph highlights the world's preoccupation with personal liberty above all, even in the face of a deadly pandemic. That's been the reoccurring theme among coronavirus rebels and anti-maskers and people who are still going out and breaking social distancing orders. The thought process is they do whatever they want. This is directly referenced in Alexa's character arc, her flippant attitude towards the dangers of COVID, her neglect of the protocols that she is supposed to follow, her self-indulgence and her priorities in fulfilling her own needs rather than the needs of the rest of the world. To make fun of Alexa having sex with Mr. Corona Man simply ignores the fact that we have already succumbed to our own lust for that gratification and allow coronavirus to get inside our panties. Kissing the coronavirus is just a literal depiction of the way that we have failed ourselves and the way that we have failed others and let this pandemic continue. The ending of the book doesn't seem to imply that there's much hope. It ends with Alexa and Corona cuddling together, and it says, she closed her eyes and she rested and rested, and it stops right here. There's an abrupt ending with that long M dash. This, of all things, should be the indication that this is not a love story because it has such an ominous ending. We don't know if the coronavirus actually ended for Alexa or not. Or we don't even know if she herself was taken by COVID. The constant emphasis of her resting and resting could imply that she herself is now dead because she let herself be taken by COVID. That is why the book ends in such an unsettling manner, because it's asking us, are we going to rest and rest and rest? Are we going to rest forever? This book makes this question, why do I have to put myself above the rules? And at what cost is that going to be to others? For that reason, I believe Kissing the Coronavirus is an incredibly powerful book that stands for more beyond just a self-published erotica on Amazon. I hope this video essay was helpful for you in providing a literary analysis for this book. I'll let you go off with your own thoughts and your own interpretations, but before I end this video, I do want to say thank you to NordVPN for sponsoring this. NordVPN is a VPN service that provides super fast service where there are over 5,500 servers in over 60 countries. They allow you to protect your data while you're in public, and they also provide 24/7 customer support. They give up to 6 simultaneous connections, and if you don't like it for whatever reason, they have a 30-day money-back guarantee. I've been using NordVPN to unlock Netflix because there are certain entertainment websites that only show specific shows in specific countries, so that's been really helpful for me. Plus, with double data encryption, I can make sure to stay extra anonymous. So if you're interested, you can get NordVPN for 68% off, which is $3.71 a month, plus an additional month free if you go to nordvpn.com/readwithcindy and use my code readwithcindy. So go ahead and subscribe to NordVPN and unsubscribe from my channel instead. And please stay safe, stay inside, wash your hands, and don't give Corona any blowjobs. Goodbye.
Government, let me tell y'all motherfuckers something. I don't know what the fuck this coronavirus is about. I don't understand how that shit was from Wuhan, China. Now all of a sudden this shit is on motherfucking tour. And let me tell y'all something, I ain't even gonna front. A bitch is scared. And a lot of you motherfuckers think it's a joke, like I was thinking, right? Guess what, bitch? Coronavirus! Coronavirus!